Dan, you are live.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to the Wednesday, May 12th meeting of the 2021 meeting of the East Lansing Planning Commission. I'll start off by introducing a couple. Why don't I start out by welcoming a couple of new faces, and I'll let one of them talk and then he will let the other one talk, as I understand. We're joined by Tom Fehrenbach and Mr. Peter Menzer. Tom would like to, I think he said he wanted to do the introduction of Mr. Menzer, so we'll begin with that. And then once Mr. Menzer is thoroughly initiated, we can have him begin with our roll call.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for introducing me. My name is Tom Fehrenbach. I'm the Director of Planning, Building, and Development. For those of you I haven't met in person or had the pleasure, it's great to see you all tonight. Thank you for your service to the City of East Lansing. As you know, we've had a fair bit of transition in the Planning and Zoning Division for the city, but I am absolutely delighted to introduce Peter Menzer. He is our new Planning and Zoning Administrator. He's been with the city for a few weeks, but he has hit the ground running. I think that you'll find, as I do, that his experience and background and disposition suit him very well for this position. And again, we're very, very blessed, I think, to have Peter join us. He has previously been the principal planner in Meridian Township. He's been in Meridian for 14 years. Prior to that, has experience with the Kalamazoo Downtown Development Authority as well. He's got a master's degree in public administration, as well as a bachelor's degree in urban and regional planning from Western Michigan University. So I hope you will enjoy working with Peter as much as we already do as staff. And hopefully we will also be making an announcement soon in terms of Mr. Parcells' position. I think we're very close to making an announcement there as well. So good to see you all. And again, welcome, Peter. And I'm sure the chair would be happy if you want to say a few words.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Tom, very much. I appreciate that. And hello, everyone. So I'm Peter. I'm really happy to be working with you. As Tom mentioned, I've spent the last decade and change at Meridian Township in a very similar role, working with the Planning Commission there. I've got a lot of experience with development projects and policy initiatives. And I'm actually really like zoning. So it's a rare trait in a lot of people, but I'm really excited to be on the City of East Lansing team. And I've really enjoyed my experience so far, and the people I work with have been just fantastic. And I'm really happy to be working with all of you, and I'll do whatever I can to give you the information you need to make some of these tough decisions.
Thank you, and welcome aboard. And with that, I will ask Mr. Menzer, will you please call roll?
Absolutely. Commissioner Cahill.
You're muted, Jack.
I am present from my home in East Lansing.
Thank you. Yeah, I should have mentioned that up front. So we are doing the, and if you've already done this, I'll just remind you if you already been doing it, the attending remotely, location, and then the county. Commissioner Sullivan.
Here, attending remotely from my home in East Lansing, Ingham County, Michigan.
Commissioner Williams.
Hello, everyone. I'm present, attending remotely from my home in East Lansing, Ingham County.
Commissioner Boyle.
Kathleen Boyle. I'm also attending remotely from East Lansing, Ingham County, Michigan.
Commissioner Wolf.
Here, attending remotely from East Lansing, Ingham County, Michigan.
Commissioner Lapine.
Here and attending remotely from my home in Ingham County.
Commissioner Wagner.
Here, I'm attending remotely from my home in East Lansing, Ingham County, Michigan.
Commissioner Bowman.
I am here attending remotely from my home in East Lansing, Ingham County.
Commissioner Hendricks.
Looks like he's not here yet.
Absent tonight.
That's fine. But we do have a quorum, and on that we will proceed. And I will begin our meeting as we have been beginning our meetings by saying once again, thanking everybody. Thank you all for your patience as we continue to work with this ever-changing technology. Any members of the public who are present will have an opportunity to address the commission during public comment. Each commissioner will be called on individually to speak during an item. If you may say pass if you do not have a comment for that item. Commissioners are reminded to state their name before speaking and making a motion, and that all votes of consequence will be taken with a roll call vote. Which will bring us on to item 1.2, the approval of the agenda. There was an agenda in your packet. I would move approval of that agenda. Or excuse me, I would entertain a motion to approve that agenda.
Wolf, so moved.
Sullivan, second.
Thank you. That's been moved by Commissioner Wolf and seconded by Commissioner Sullivan to approve the agenda. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, we'll have a voice vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed. That motion carries, bringing us on to item 1.3, approval of the minutes of the April 14th, 2021 meeting. I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
Cahill.
Boyle, so moved.
I heard Cahill first, Vice Chair, so I will ask, would you, thank you. That's been moved by Commissioner Cahill and seconded by Vice Chair Boyle. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. Once again, let's do this by voice vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 And those opposed, that motion carries as well. I will note that Commissioner Hendricks has joined us. Welcome, Commissioner Hendricks.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah,
Sorry, apologies.
No worries. We have a full complement of commission now. Moving us on to item 2, we do not have any committee reports that I am aware of. Item 3, staff reports, Mr. Menzer or Ms. Schmidt or Mr. Fehrenbach. We have a bunch of staff here this evening.
I don't believe
Typically to go to you to Mr. Menzer, though, I believe.
we don't have anything tonight. Thank you, though.
Thank you. Item 4, do commissioner announcements. Do any commissioners have anything they wish to announce? All right, then seeing no hands. Communications from citizens. This is a time in our meeting when we would take comments from citizens. Typically, when we would do this live, we would just ask you to raise your hand, but because we are meeting remotely, we have a different procedure by which we take public comment. Each caller in our queue will have 5 minutes to address the commission, and at the end of 5 minutes, you will be placed back on mute. Callers will be identified by the last 3 digits of their phone number. When called upon, you will be unmuted. If you're called upon but do not wish to speak, we ask that you please indicate so by saying pass. If you do choose to speak, we ask that you please clearly state your name and address before addressing the commission. This is not a requirement, but it does help our clerk keep accurate minutes of this meeting. I am checking to see. It looks like we do have an attendee. Our consultant, but perhaps she has some additional comments she'd like to make. So Ms. Urdialis, if you would invite our attendee forward, and if she would care to say anything, knowing that she's going to be very shortly speaking to us as part of the agenda.
Sharon Woods, you are allowed to speak.
Good evening, everybody, and I will graciously pass.
Thank you. And as I see it, that's the only other attendee, Ms. Urdialis, is that correct?
That is correct.
All right, thank you. Then we will move on from communications to citizens onto our special presentation, the draft housing study. You've just heard briefly from Ms. Woods. We're about to hear from her extensively, but I believe Mr. Fehrenbach would like to lead into this agenda item, and so I'll turn it over to you, Tom.
Thank you very much. And Rebecca, if you can make Sharon a panelist, I think that would be helpful. She will probably want to share her screen. As the commission's aware, we have been engaged with Sharon Woods and her team at Land Use USA, Urban Strategies, along with CIB Planning, to undertake a housing study for the city of East Lansing to provide key data and insights to inform the discussion and ultimately the community engagement in planning for housing for the city in the future. At this early stage, we've attached an updated draft, slightly updated from what the council saw. It is what the Housing Commission has seen as of, I believe that was last week. It's hard to keep it straight these days. and this is a portion of the ultimate study, really the data-centric portion of the study. This is, as I mentioned, previewed by the Housing Commission as well as the City Council. And this is really what's before you tonight to have a chance to review as well. Tonight, we've asked Ms. Woods to provide a brief overview and some highlights and give you an opportunity to share some of your insights and any questions that you might have for her. And we do ask that you kind of focus on the data aspects tonight, and also think about any guidance that you'd like to provide staff in terms of what you need to see, what you'd like to see to prepare for the future conversations around this effort. Concurrently, staff is also working with Sharon and other members of her team. You'll meet Mr. Justin Sprague in subsequent conversations. And we're working to develop a housing strategic plan, a draft of which is going to be released soon. Planned next steps will include, basically reviewing the current policies around housing, the current regulations around housing in East Lansing, as well as identifying priority areas for discussion and ultimately recommendations for actions. And these will be included in the housing strategic plan for the city and ultimately for the council to consider. So these are the first steps in what is going to be quite a lot of work. So thank you in advance for bringing your energy to this effort. I think it's a very important effort for the city. That said, there is a lot to digest here, not just for staff, obviously, but also for the commissions, the council, and ultimately the community. So we think that taking it in steps is appropriate. And I think that as the framework for sort of our work unfolds, it will be an iterative process. But ultimately, I think we'll be leading to this housing strategic plan, which will guide then the efforts of the community and staff moving forward. So with that, I'd love to introduce Ms. Woods, Sharon Woods, and I'm sorry, I have to apologize in advance. I have a family conflict, so I'm going to have to shove off around 8 o'clock tonight. But I will certainly be paying attention to your input. It's very important to us. And I know that you are in capable hands with not just staff, but also with Sharon. So please take it away, Sharon, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom. Good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining me this evening to kind of do a review of the residential target market analysis. And I'm calling in virtually from my home-based business in Langsburg, Michigan, which is in Clinton County. And the purpose of this evening is, again, as Tom so nicely said, is I would like to review the documents with you and the market study results. One of my objectives for this evening is to give you a guide on how to read the materials and how to read the exhibits so that when you're reading it on your own, you have some confidence that you know that you're interpreting it correctly, because I know there's so much there. There's really no way that we will be able to get through every exhibit and look at all of the materials tonight. So really it's an introduction to the market studies, the reports, how are they assembled, how do you read the exhibits. If I'm going too fast and you want me to slow down, you can shout out, and I will happily take questions as I go. If you would like to interrupt me, you're welcome to do that. This is really your meeting. I'm your guest, and I appreciate your time in advance. So what I would like to do is go ahead and share my screen. And I'm doing that now. Can you give me a nod, somebody, Tom, that you can see the report okay? So this is my PDF tool, or software. It's a little bit different than Adobe, but you can see I have 4 files open, and I have my arrow. Hopefully you can see my arrow. There's the main market study. There's also 3 appendices, Appendix 1, 2, and 3. So the 3 appendices are organized this way. There's target market analysis resources in Appendix 1. And so anytime you have a question about who is migrating into or within the city of East Lansing, like really, what is their diversity? How do they behave? What is their lifestyle preference? All of that information is in Appendix 1. And I'm going to come back to Appendix 1 and spend a few minutes on it and what is actually included, because there's some important exhibits in here that I want you to see. Appendix 2 is just a focus on demographics. There's some real fundamental market parameters that are essential to doing a housing study. And those market parameters or demographic parameters are all located in Appendix 2. The first part is households by tenure over time. So we always take the number of households that are in a community and we split it where we look at the owners versus the renters. And I'm showing you this page. I might not always zoom in when I'm just kind of doing an overview like this. And again, on this exhibit, I'm not intending to dive too deeply into the data. I'm really just trying to provide you with an overview of how to read the information. So usually there's a variable in the title and a geography. Watch the geography because that does sometimes change. The second sentence in every title is intended to just really document again, what is the data on the page really supposed to be saying? So this is forecasts of the number of households by tenure over time. And I am making an assumption here that we're assuming some pro-growth housing policies in general. So you will see as you look at some of these charts, households by tenure, household income, values and rents, population growth, the forecast numbers, you'll see a little bit of an upward trend. And the reason is that I am assuming that the city of East Lansing will actually have some pro-growth policies. Think of it another way. I'm not assuming that you don't want to grow. You know, there's a basic assumption that you do want to grow in some way. So I load some of that growth into the numbers. Even if we saw, like, for example, these are the owner households for the city of East Lansing, owners only. I saw a little bit of a dip, you know, after really it's kind of surprising that there's a dip here in the data, but then it started to recover and I'm kind of projecting that it will continue to grow. And the same thing with the number of renters. So that's one thing to look for, is the growth trend. The second thing is I'm interested in seeing the split between the data. How many are owners and how many are renters, and what's the balance? So in some markets, it's 50-50. In a lot of markets, it's 75% are homeowners and 25% are renters. You're kind of flipped to the other way. And this, we know why. It's because of MSU and the influence of the student population. So you really have, you know, close to 10,000 renters and close to 6,000 homeowners. The other data that's important in here is households by income by tenure. So again, we split the data by owners versus renters. It's really important to do this because when we start looking at what is the market potential for contract rents or gross rents, we have to really take into consideration the incomes of renters only, not the median household income of renters and owners combined. We really like to separate it. Your owners have a median household income currently of about 120,000, renters 27. Usually the spread isn't so wide. It's so profound in East Lansing because the students really have, most of them are going to be enrolled and not necessarily working, or certainly not working full-time jobs. We do also know, though, that those student incomes are subsidized by parents. Like, you know, the parents often are paying for the rent and paying for a lot of things that those enrolled college students might be benefiting from. So it's not, you know, a gloomy number. Let me say also that, well, I'm going to pause there. I like to digress. Sometimes I have to keep myself on track. There's another data set in here that splits owner occupied home values. And again, you can see my trend line forecasting it continuing to grow. And we've really seen these numbers take off during COVID and during that economic crisis. Lots of things happening that are driving prices up in terms of both owner occupied home values and renter occupied rents. And we can come back and talk about that a little bit. I could talk for half an hour on what are the drivers that motive, what are the variables that are influencing these growth rates. And I'm sure you in your own mind can also you know, deduce and extrapolate some of that from the data as well. There's in the renter data, there's two numbers. The larger number is gross rent, which usually includes some utilities. The smaller number is contract rent. Contract rent is what the renter is actually writing a contract for as a lease and a lease document. The difference is only $25, which is not very much. And the reason is that many of the student housing units are going to come with utilities included. Lots of student housing comes with, you know, electricity included, heat included. It's one of the perks that it's not, you know, it's usually loaded into the contract rent. In other markets that are not influenced by universities, I'll see the difference here as it being at least $100, sometimes $150. So that's the difference in those numbers. And then I also have population data in here because I always like to tie population back to the census, especially the 2010 and 2000 decennial census. And I always like to just kind of make sure that I'm understanding what the population is as well. But these are the ones that are essential to the housing study, always looking at households by tenure, what is their income? These are kind of the demand variables, right? And then the supply side is, what do we currently have? What are the home values and rents? I also want to clarify that I have some charts in here in the next section, section B. I'm still in appendix 2, where I provide some comparisons to other geographies within the region. It's always nice to have a benchmark to kind of have a sense of, well, is that high or is it low? So for example, number of households, I'm providing some data for DeWitt Township, Meridian Township, the city of Lansing, just so that we can kind of get a sense, a barometer on how large the city of East Lansing is. I ran some similar comparisons on, for example, median household income. This is all owners and renters. I just wanted to show, how does East Lansing measure up on median household income? And again, your numbers may look surprisingly low, but they're being pulled down by the low incomes of students that are really 75% of your households. And then what are the renters as a share of total households? 63% of your households are renters. And that's quite high. So you can see the influence of that university on your data, on these market parameters. Median home value, though, you're at about 220. Now, Okemos, I do want to clarify Okemos CDP and also, let's see, Okemos, and then, well, Okemos is part of Meridian Township, just to clarify. So it's a little bit of double reporting. Meridian Township includes Okemos, and I'm just reporting Okemos also separately, just so that we have the data. Why not show it? And then median contract rents. Here, your rents are quite high. Part of the reason, again, is MSU. So student rentals are often leased on the per bed or per head, you know, per student, per bed, or per bedroom. And so you might have a 4-bedroom unit that is actually 4 students, and each student is signing a lease. And the developers, the property managers, the building managers kind of, there's a real benefit in doing that. They really get a premium out of the rents that way. So even though the students have relatively low incomes, you know, they're paying a premium on rent because they're paying per bedroom. They're paying per student. And that data really influences the rents. There's other data in here. I wanted to clarify that I also have comparisons in here for Ingham County, the same data, households by tenure, income, values, and rents. And then I also gave you Clinton County because I happen to be doing a study for DeWitt Township and I had the data. So I thought, why not share that with you as well? You might find it interesting. So again, really watch that upper right-hand corner, the geography changes. Usually if it's East Lansing, it's dark blue. So you'll see on these charts, East Lansing is always highlighted in dark blue. So you can find East Lansing easily. Again, I was doing a study for DeWitt Township, so it's in dark blue as well. And if the data is in gray, it's usually because it's a county. If it's light blue, it's one of the neighboring communities. So here's Ingham County and Clinton County, and they're in gray. I do that on purpose, just as a visual check. It reminds me right away, I'm not looking at East Lansing, I'm actually looking at a county. I also have the data in here for Michigan. Again, I love doing this exercise where I'll print these pages out and, you know, kind of spread them out on a desk and start comparing them to really see how do we differ compared to Ingham County as an average or the state as an average. I encourage you to do that. We won't have time to do that tonight, but it is an interesting exercise. So I really encourage you to kind of really study the data that way, compare geographies, and you know, look for correlations in the data, and look to actually, you know, cerebrally and, you know, creatively, deductively, strategically think through the data and think about what the data implications might have for the city of East Lansing. So I certainly won't be able to, you know, my own brain, I look at the data and you can follow me. I'm triangulating the data every step as I go. And you can do the same thing on your own, is try to triangulate what the data means. The third appendix is what I call a real estate analysis. This is a study of, it's actually an inventory of what's currently available in the city of East Lansing that's for sale and for lease. However, we did focus on attached formats only. I didn't try to capture an inventory of every detached house that's available and for sale in the city. I really focused on, well, actually I did, I take that back. I kept catching myself here. This page is actually attached formats and the second page is detached. So I guess we do have it. These are detached houses for sale. Now we ran the inventory twice. We did it in November and then we refreshed it and ran it again in January. One of the things that I'm really interested in doing as I look at this inventory is I'm tracking, I've got data in here. I'm tracking not only the year that the building opened and how many units are in the building, but also for individual units. For example, here at the villas on Stratford condos on Hamlet Circle, we describe these as fourplexes and townhouses. They opened in 2015. There's 4 units in each building. They have 2 units that are available. The 2 units available each have 3 bedrooms, and there's 2 bathrooms in each of those units, and each of them have 1,650 square feet, and one of them we have a price for at $255,000. Here's another example, the MAC condos, 40 units. Here's a 2-bedroom unit with 2 baths, 1,220 square feet, and they want $265,000. So you can kind of scan through this real fast. This is what was available in November through January. And it peaks out at about $265,000. Another thing that I did with that data, I don't have it on these sheets, but it's in my spreadsheet, is I calculated the asking price per square foot. And I went ahead and plotted that data. Here's the results for the city of East Lansing. I did a scatter plot. The x-axis shows the square footage. The y-axis shows the asking price per square foot. Usually there's a relationship. I can kind of see the relationship in here. I don't have a lot of observations, so it's a little unraveled. But usually there's kind of a ski slope in here. I can almost see the ski slope. There's one in here that would be kind of the moderate, conventional houses, that are on offer. And there might be a steeper ski slope in here. What I'm really pointing out is that usually smaller units have a higher price per square foot, and larger units have a lower price per square foot. This is important because we work with this data to show developers. Half of my clients are developers, and I use this to show them in unique markets that relationship, because I'm often trying to educate them on the importance of right-sizing housing units, that we shouldn't be building mansion-sized housing units, which in their minds, they need a mansion-sized house to get a mansion-sized price to offset their costs. And I use this to educate them that actually, if they would just build a smaller house, they could probably get a higher price per square foot. I'm going to show it to you another way, which is with the rental units. Here's the rental data for the city of East Lansing. Now you can really see the ski slope. We have lots of choices. In fact, I inventoried 175 buildings that had units for lease. And of course, this was during COVID. 175 buildings were inventoried. And you can, again, here's an example that we had, the landmark on Grand River. Actually 2 pages of units that were available. We have studios, not even a bedroom, but just a studio. So an open floor plan as small as 350 square feet. And they wanted $1,125 per person for that unit. Because it only accommodates one, the total rent is $1,125. But there are other examples here. We have a 2-bedroom. And the square feet is only 725. They want 1,300 per student, per head or per bed, which means they're going to get 2,200 per month out of that total unit. So this is these prices are important because I'm really trying to show for you what is motivating developers to build student housing, even when it seems when we do our market observations, and I spent, several days in the market doing field work, and being local as well, kind of scratching my head, wondering why are we building so many student units or at least residential rental units that appear to be geared towards students when student enrollment at the university is not increasing at nearly the same rate. In fact, student enrollment is barely increasing, maybe 100 students a year on average, and maybe 1,000 on a really good year. So, it's largely motivated by the fact that you can, a developer, a building owner can get $2,600 for a 2-bedroom apartment, and you would not be able to get that in another market. So again, the relationship is important, showing that smaller units get a higher rent per square foot, and helping developers understand that this is really important in other markets. In East Lansing, you have quite a few units here that are actually less than 400 square feet. This is rare to see in non-university towns. So most other markets that I go to, the smallest unit would be about 500 square feet, right about in here. And usually this is a gap. But again, you can see, if the developers are building 1,200 square foot rental units, on moderate units, maybe you'll get $1.25, $1.50. If there's a premium, they're going after students, they might get $2.50 $2.50 a square foot. If they reduce the unit size, then they can go even higher. You know, some of these premium units, maybe they're on the river, or maybe they're just right across from the campus, or they're in downtown East Lansing. And maybe there are other perks, like maybe they're brand new, that they might even get $4 a square foot, which in other markets is almost unheard of. And because this is so important, I'm going to pause here and see if there are any questions, or would you prefer I keep going?
Any questions for Ms. Woods?
I have a question.
Vice Chair.
Okay, I wonder how you determine the income for students, because looking at the amount of income on the graph and looking at the value of rents, it would look impossible if they were actually paying the rents out of that income. So how is the income reported, or how do you determine that income for students?
Yes, so the income for students actually was just income for all renters, whether they're students or not, and it was 27,000. And all I was saying is that the income for the renters is suppressed because such a large share of those renters are students. However, you're making a good point that with 27,000, how could you possibly pay these rents? And the reason is that the parents are subsidizing the students.
So what is the income information derived from?
The American Community Survey, which is basically the census.
Okay.
So the American Community Survey is survey data. It's not quite, it's got a little more variance in the data than the decennial census, but the last update reflects 2019 data. And then I take it and I forecast it forward.
And would that be earned income then, if you have a student loan that isn't being reported as income? Would that be correct?
It is actually, I believe it's actually earned income and unearned. So it's total income. So unearned, for those of you who aren't sure, unearned income would be things like, yes, like loans or welfare or earnings from stock investments or Social Security. Those are all kind of unearned income. And so the income numbers should be, you know, total reported income, including earned and unearned. So earned income is probably more like 10,000 for these students, because they might be just working a part-time job.
And possibly at minimum wage.
Oh, quite probably. Yes, so that's tough. Did I answer your question?
Yes, and also why the student debts are as big as they are.
Yes, absolutely. Why do students graduate with so much debt? Absolutely. So I don't know how you could possibly rent, you know, a place on your own if you don't have parents helping and you don't have a job. I mean, when I went to college myself, I had to work, and it's a real struggle, you know, to be able to be enrolled full-time and work full-time to pay for your room and board. It is absolutely a challenge. And so you'll find that students who don't have support will actually, you know, buy groceries on credit cards and just let the credit cards run up until they graduate, and then they carry that debt to their first job, which is what I did. Too much information, I know. So let me dive into Appendix 1, which is important also. And I'm going to, there's a narrative in here, a little longer narrative than the other appendices. I want to introduce, and I believe some of you have probably seen this material before in the past, but one of the things that I do with a target market analysis, it's a little bit different than a conventional housing study, because I like to look at lifestyle clusters of households that are on the move and that are migrating into and within the city of East Lansing. And I also like to look at what they're looking for. So in terms of, are they renters or owners? Do they want to live in an urban place or a rural setting? Do they want to live in a detached house or an attached loft or a townhouse? What are they looking for? And the way that I get at that data is I start with these 71 lifestyle clusters. And this page, I'm going to flip back and forth between these two pages because this is actually a 2-page table. I'll stop here and you can see the title shows 1 through 36 lifestyle clusters. Just to clarify, I'm now in Appendix 1, Section A. And the next page, the title says 37 to 71 lifestyle clusters. It's actually a 2-page table. You could stack them. Going back to the first one, the richest of the rich in the nation is cluster number 1. I'm trying to move this out of the, there we go. Let me zoom in a little bit for you. So cluster 1 is called American royalty. They're the richest of the rich in the nation on average. And you have 8 households within that lifestyle cluster alone currently living in the city of East Lansing. The second most affluent is number 2, Platinum Prosperity. You have 447 households living in East Lansing that are Platinum Prosperity. So those are really affluent groups. Once we get into Family Fantastic, they're not, you know, they still have deep pockets, but they're not like upper crust. Family Fantastic, you have 1,000 of them, 1,050. Full Pockets Empty Nest, 1,066. Aging in Place, 360. Status Seeking Singles, 350. So you can kind of get a flavor of these different lifestyle clusters currently living in East Lansing. So again, they're listed in general by income, where number 1 is the richest. And then this is about midway through the list. I just couldn't get them all on one page. So I went to a second page. Here's the second half. And you're going to see here that the most prevalent lifestyle cluster in the city of East Lansing is the colleges and cafes, where you have 7,360 households in that lifestyle cluster. And that's why I know that most of your renters are students, because I've triangulated in my brain, and you're doing it right now. I can see your faces. You know, if we've got 3/4 of, at least 2/3 of your households are renters, and the renters have incomes of 27,000, which is significantly lower than the owners. And then I look at this data and I see your most prevalent lifestyle cluster is colleges and cafes. I would know right away that you're a college town, even if you didn't tell me that you were. I'd be able to tell. So the next, right next to them is Striving Singles, 764 households. They are also important. They're not necessarily students, but they just kind of rub elbows. They may be recently graduated. They may be young faculty or staff at the university. They may be, you know, just young alumni. They may be there because they are sports enthusiasts. They may be there because they just love the scene. They love the setting. They want to be in downtown East Lansing, and they love that kind of lifestyle. So they're very close. And I have 2 additional pages in here right after that, where so in these pages, I had the numbers, the actual number of households. On the next 2 pages, I actually convert it to a percent. I want you to see what percent of your households, your current households, fall into each lifestyle cluster. And then I provided a comparison to Ingham County. I did the same math for Ingham County. So by using percents, we're able to set them to the same barometer. It's basically indexed, they're indexed together. So for example, and I want to clarify, Ingham County is in light blue, and the data is overlapping each other. The data sets are on top of each other. So I'm going to zoom in on one and show you an example on how to, again, you can tell this is a guide on how to read the data. Let's look at No Place Like Home. The percent here, 3%, goes with the city of East Lansing. The data variables are for East Lansing. The data labels are for East Lansing. So I can look at this and I can see that 3% of the city of East Lansing's households are No Place Like Home. And behind it, there's a blue bar. It's just a little taller. And I can tell from deduction, it's about 4%. So that tells me that about 4% of Ingham County's households are No Place Like Home. So you're similar. You know, it's not a big difference. It's similar enough that I wouldn't say that East Lansing is real different from Ingham County. There's others where, yes, Ed.
Sharon, how are these lifestyle clusters defined? I mean, I can kind of understand like if it's based on income or age, but some of these don't really, I mean, I'm surprised at the specificity of a lot of these.
Yep, that's a really good question, and thank you for bringing that up, because usually I get into this a little bit. I purchased the data from Experian. Experian is one of 3 companies that also provides households with credit scores or individuals with credit scores. Experian has access, if they know what your credit score is, then they have access to a wealth of information about how you use money, how your household uses money, and how you carry debt. They also have so much more about you. They know whether you own a home or rent, whether you have a car lease, what kind of a car your lease is on, what kind of a car you own, because they have all that credit data. They also know your address, so they know where you live. And then they have lots of socioeconomics based on your address. They can geocode what block group you live in, and they know the socioeconomics from the census of that block group. And they also do their massive triangulation to figure out how different households behave by block group. And then they use that data to create 71 lifestyle clusters. And they kind of, they refer to them kind of as a mosaic. You might have heard of similar clusters or similar groups like Tapestries by Esri or Prisms by Nielsen Claritas. They're all kind of similar. I like using Experian's data. I found that it's the deepest, the richest, and the most accurate. So I do not create the names. I actually subscribe to the data. This is also a page that is provided to me by Experian. And so all 71 clusters are on this page. I'm going to zoom in for you. You can do this on your own desktop, and you can see the pixelation is pretty nice. You can actually dive in and see, for example, urban ambition, what's the age profile, the income, how do they live in general. I also went a little further and created a 2-page summary, just a 1 sentence on each lifestyle cluster. Again, I had to fit it to 2 pages. Just 1 sentence about, you know, kind of a summary of who they are. There's other data in here that shows how they behave. So this is all 71 lifestyle clusters that I managed to fit onto a single page. And it shows the percent, these are Michigan averages, the share of all Michigan households that are singles without children. And that's on this page. And then there's also movership rate. I'm going fast now, but I'm going to come back. Movership rate, whether they live in an urban place, whether they're renters, or whether they're attached, whether they choose to live in attached units. I'm going to come back to that in a minute, because I want to I hope I answered your question, Ed. Chris?
Yes, I have a somewhat related question. I notice on these pages you're showing us right now, well, in most of this, you're classifying households, not individuals. And on the page on the screen right now, it says that it excludes students. The 2 pages prior to this said they include students. And my question is, how do you define a student household? Because in my experience, when I was that age, there were many renting households where there were students and non-students in the same household.
Yes. So actually what I should clarify, where it says exclude students, that's oversimplified. And my approach was overly simplified as well. What I really did is I looked at the 7,359 colleges and cafes, and I spent some time trying to dissect that to try to figure out how many of them are actually students and how many are actually faculty or staff or affiliated to the university in some other way. So I was able to separate that data. And then I looked at some of these other groups, like particularly the striving singles. You could argue that some of them are actually students as well. And I ended up, after I did the analysis, it ended up kind of being like an almost perfect swap. It became kind of like it was a wash. So I ended up concluding that the 7,359 is actually, even though it may include some non-students, it's a good representation for the number of students in this data set. So when I say that I excluded students, actually all I did is I took the 7,359 bar off, and then I recalculated the percents. That's all I did.
And that number 7,300 is households, not students. So it actually represents probably quite a few more actual people, students.
Absolutely, yes. This is all households, and it includes, what this should say is includes student households. But that also gets easily misinterpreted. So sometimes I'll get the question that, does that mean that it excludes all households that might have a parent and maybe their offspring is enrolled at the university, but they just happen to be living at home? And I'll say, no, not only if they fell within this category. So all I did was I took this category off when I calculated the percents. So I hear you. I waffled on how to label that. I'm not trying to exclude every household that has a student in it. I tried to exclude this bar, which is predominantly student households, which means that household is comprised of students. So it may be 2 or 3 roommates sharing a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment.
Sharon, can you see the hands that Commissioner Sullivan and Vice Chair Boyle both have questions? I don't know. Can you see those hands as well?
I sometimes I get distracted.
Oh, no, it's fine. I'm sure they're waiting.
Shouting out.
And now Commissioner Cahill, you can call them out in order, whatever you like.
Please go ahead.
Let's start with the Vice Chair.
I think you may have just answered my question, which is, what is a student household? If you have 3 students renting an apartment, that's a household.
Yes.
Even if they have individual leases and may not know each other, it's still a household.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Sullivan?
Yeah, just to follow up on that and then ask an additional question. So, for example, would like a fraternity and sorority where there's 40 or 50 people, would that be considered a single household?
Yes, that is one household.
Okay, and then additionally, was any analysis done on other major college towns in the state, like Kalamazoo or Mount Pleasant? Was East Lansing notably different from any of them in any particular way?
We did not do an analog or comparison analysis to other university towns, although I have done quite a few university town studies. But most of them, honestly, in smaller communities. So the answer is no, although I'm was really comfortable working with this data set from a university perspective. Now, I'd like to offer that's a good kind of question to kind of take a note of, and maybe have a dialogue with Tom Fehrenbach after today's session, if there are questions or requests or data sets like that you wish were in the study. Those are the sort of asks, absolutely, we won't be able to answer every question that you have. And I know going into it, you're going to have some really good, tough questions like that. If things like that are really, really important to you, then we can talk about whether additional work needs to be done.
Commissioner Cahill, I saw your hand was up, but.
Yeah, my question was mainly answered. I wanted clarification on what a household meant. I do have a question though. Back on page 4 of the report, it showed demand and supply in the city.
Yes.
And the demand for traditional houses was 40%. And the supply was 45%. Do you have a breakdown of whether those are student houses or just regular renters?
That excludes students.
Okay.
So I do want to clarify, you're jumping ahead of me a little bit, but that's okay. I certainly don't mind, but absolutely all of the market potential numbers in the main report exclude students. So I'd like to clarify that I was really charged, right out of the gate on this market study to answer the question of, in addition to students, we're not trying to push the students out in any way with this study. And I really want to clarify that we're not trying to replace them or push them out. The real question that I was asked by Tom Fehrenbach and his team was, if we were to diversify, what other lifestyle clusters could we diversify with? If we wanted to just kind of expand the target markets and the mix, should we be going after seniors or workers or families or singles or young professionals? What does that diversity look like? So all of the market potential numbers are focused on, this is the diversity and opportunity beyond students, not including students. I hope that answers your question. So I wanted to highlight here, I'm going to try to finish Appendix 1 in about 5 minutes, and then we'll go back and look at those market potential numbers closer together. So I'd like to go to the second page of this sheet where I'm comparing Ingham County and East Lansing together. And I was explaining that sometimes I've got the word eclipse on one of these pages. Right here it shows Ingham County eclipsed. That means that if you see like a 13 and you don't see a light blue bar, it means that 13% of East Lansing's households are full pocket empty nest. Well, Ingham County is less than that. And you can't see the light blue bar because it's hidden behind. But the inverse works. I can also look at this data and see where there's a light blue bar but no dark blue bar. That tells me that these households are showing up in these little lifestyle clusters here: blue collar comfort, stock cars and state parks, settled and sensible. They're in Ingham County. But when I run the percents for East Lansing, it's less than 1%, so it doesn't really show up in the data. So it tells me that where I see a light blue but no dark blue, it tells me that they are showing up in larger percents in the county than they are within the city of East Lansing. And because of that, it's very possible that they could be bypassing East Lansing, and that they could be a really ideal target market for you if you want to diversify. So let me give you an example. Here's digital dependence, 051. 1% of your households in the city of East Lansing are digital dependents. But maybe at least 4% of Ingham County's population is digital dependents. So that tells me that maybe there's a gap there for East Lansing. Maybe we could do better of competing for your fair share of the digital dependence. So it kind of highlights, it's showing who's living in Ingham County and who's bypassing East Lansing because they're just not showing up in dark blue. Another one is rooted flower power. 5% of Ingham County's households are rooted flower power, and less than 1% of your households are rooted flower power. This group in here on the second page, rooted flower power, I'm going to read them. Wired for Success, Bohemian Groove, Rooted Flower Power, Digital Dependence, Family Troopers. These are great target markets. I find that developers who are building new housing product today are often going after these target markets, and there's a couple of reasons. One is that they have good movership rates. A movership rate is just the share of that group of households that moves in any given year. So it just means that a large share of them move. They're on the move. They're very mobile, very transient, easy to pull up roots and make a change. The second is that they are gravitating towards urban places. They have market rate tolerances for prices. So they're not necessarily looking to rent a place for $550 a month. They will tolerate $850, $950, maybe even $1,100 in a typical market. So they're really good candidates for building things like lofts. Let's look at one of these. I want to choose one of these lifestyle clusters. I'm actually going to choose the Striving Singles, where you have 9% of your households are striving singles. Right above that, you see colleges and cafes. It's empty on purpose because I took that data off before I calculated the percents. I know I said that before. I'm being redundant, but just to reinforce that. There's no data in here because I took the data off. So 9%, let's look at the striving singles are the category that in other markets where we're seeing development of lofts, urban lofts, they're going after the striving singles, not the colleges and cafes. And the striving singles pay by the unit, not by the bedroom, not by the head. They pay for the unit. So on these sheets, I wanted to show you how they behave by sheet. So striving singles, let me make sure I have my number right. They're number 54. And then on these sheets, you can find them on the sheet. Here's striving singles, number 54. The way to read this is that 73% of this group are singles without children. They're in dark blue because they're a target market for the city of East Lansing. Anything in dark blue on these pages are target markets. I've identified them as target markets for the city of East Lansing because they meet the criteria that they have good movership rates. They're already in Ingham County. They're either a little bit in East Lansing or they're practically on your doorstep anyway. They might be bypassing you a little bit because they're having a tough time finding the entry point, the price point to enter into the market. But if we build the product that they're looking for with the price point that they can tolerate, then they would migrate into the city of East Lansing. And that's why they're dark blue. So striving singles is an important one because they tend to choose urban lofts in downtown settings like downtown Lansing, downtown East Lansing, and downtown Lansing. So 73 striving singles, 73% are singles without children. 51%, I'll read the data for you. If you can't see it, it's okay. 51% move every year. A really high movership rate. 70% will choose an urban place rather than a rural setting. 75% are renters. And 98%, 97% will choose an attached unit rather than rent a house. So that's how to read the data. I'm going to go dive in just a little bit more. And thank you for persevering with me and hanging in there. Striving singles was number 54. I want to dive into section C, which is the target markets that are actually going to be home buyers for you. But I know that the striving singles are renters. I have the renters in a separate section. I believe they're in section D. So I'm scrolling down through, you can see me scrolling on the left there. Here's section D. These are the target markets for the city of East Lansing that are going to be renters and striving singles. I'm going to find that page because I want to walk you through one of these sheets to just explain how to read this as well. Here's a profile on the striving singles. Here's the number 54. These are national averages. On average, 96, I said before, 97, close enough. 96 to 97% are renters. Of those renters, 84, 85% move every year. Of the few, just only 4% are homeowners. Of those few owners, a quarter of them move every year. These movership rates are really high. The national average for renters is 30%. On average, across the nation, coast to coast, all renters, all 71 clusters, 30% of all renters move every year. So to say that the striving singles, 84% of them move every year, that's really high. We also know 70% will choose a larger city, which you might correlate to being a more urban place. They're not looking for houses. The lower charts are really important. I use this data extensively to try to figure out that one sheet that we started looking at earlier, showing, you know, what's the supply versus the demand by building size. I use this data to get there. This is part of my model. So the striving singles, half of them will choose buildings with 50 or more units, but 20% will choose, you know, a smaller building size, smaller multiplexes, townhouses, triplexes, fourplexes, but in general, they're not looking for houses. The profile for these renters is different for each lifestyle cluster. And I'm going to show you how different they are. Here's going top to bottom. These urban edge, they are one of your target markets. They're the most affluent of the renters that would be target markets. They're G25. The number's 25. And I have these sheets put together in order by income. So 25 means they rank 25 out of 71 clusters in income across the nation. And you can watch that bottom chart here as I flip through these different pages. The next is Wired for Success. Here's the Bohemian Groove, Full Steam Ahead, Urban Ambition. So they all have different inclinations to choose houses versus attached units. And I hope that helps you. There are also maps in here. They're not the most beautiful maps. And I want to clarify that the detail that's here is about as detailed as the maps get. They're not real good for trying to zoom in and like finding your address and figuring out where your block group is or where a street runs. I mean, we have the main corridors and connectors in here, but not the local streets. So I really encourage you to use these more from 10,000 feet in the air, just as a general broad perspective of where the striving singles are living in the greater metropolitan area. Rather than by block group in East Lansing, what I'm really trying to show you is within this entire geography, this is where the striving singles are choosing to live today. And they definitely are showing up. Again, 9% of your households are striving singles, and they're really living in here. And then you might be curious to see, well, where else do they live in the area? And it varies, again, by target market. Here's the family troopers. Senior discounts, they're one of the lower income. Daring to dream. So diversifying, we can talk about diversity in a lot of different ways, but I will say the best way in the housing market to encourage diversity within a community is to make sure that the entry point on price point is attainable for diverse households, and particularly with lower incomes. So often I'll get the question of, well, Sharon, did you look at the data by race or ethnicity? And my response, I'm anticipating the question, so I'll say, we know, and it's not fair, but there's a correlation between race and ethnicity and income. And it's not fair and it's unfortunate, but some races and ethnicities have lower incomes. If you want more diversity, then it's important to provide housing product and housing choices that is attainable for lower income households, which may have a diverse ethnic, cultural, or race backgrounds. So when we look at like daring to dream, and I see that they're kind of, they're in Lansing and they're in the market, absolutely. We know that they're here, but they're not finding East Lansing to be attainable or tolerably priced. Here's Hope for Tomorrow. They are really, truly lower income. And Tough Times, they're among the poorest. In fact, they are number 71 in income, the poorest of the poor in the nation. And this is where they're living in East Lansing. Any questions on that? I realize we're running into the second hour here. And if you have questions on Appendix 1, I'd be happy to answer them now. Otherwise, I'll dive into the main report.
Any further questions? Okay, let's go back to the main report then, please. Ms.
All right, we'll get to the market potential right away. So what I've done is, you're not seeing my Excel spreadsheet, but I kind of would like to explain how it works. My spreadsheet, my model is basically, it's an Excel spreadsheet. It's 71 rows long. So I look at all 71 lifestyle clusters and I list them on imagine the leftmost column. And then I have all of this data that I showed you at my fingertips in an Excel format. I can load it into my model. I know how many households in each lifestyle cluster live within the city of East Lansing currently. I showed you that. I also know what percent within each lifestyle cluster, what percent are renters and what percent are owners. So I can take the data and split it. And I actually do that. I say, okay, here's the renters, that's another column. And then here's the owners, that's a separate column. I know how many renters move every year by lifestyle cluster. So I can do the math again. I can go through every one of those 71 lifestyle clusters and go, okay, of those renters, this is how many move. And I do the math again, and I'm kind of building left to right here. I do the same thing with the owners. And then I know what their nationwide, what their median income is for the nation. And I can adjust that for the city of East Lansing. I make that adjustment. And then based on their income, I can figure out what the owners, what their tolerance would be to buy a house on price point. I can back into it. And then on the renters, I can also back into, based on their income, what they would tolerate to pay in contract rent. And I just keep adding columns to my spreadsheet. And then I also know what percent of every lifestyle cluster, what percent will choose a house, what percent will choose a duplex, triplex, fourplex, sixplex, and larger. So I basically do the math for you. And then I roll it all up. I roll it up back up to the top when I'm done. And I have the conclusions, and this is one of my sheets that show the conclusions. So based on that rolled up result of all of that data in my model, of the households that are inclined to migrate into the city of East Lansing in any given year, 40% of them will choose a detached house. I compared that to your current supply. About 45% of your current housing stock is detached houses, which means you have a little bit of a surplus. We could argue that there's just a little bit of a mismatch. The challenge, as we know, what this doesn't show is that so many of those houses are taken by students. Of the households migrating into the market, again, these are not including the students. 60% of them would choose something other than a house. 55% of your current housing stock is something other than a house. So there's a little bit of a mismatch there as well. It suggests that you could actually still build some attached units for non-students. There's some sheets in here that look like this. These are what I call step buildings. And these step buildings are just intended to give you some images to think about as we start kind of having a dialogue about, well, what is a duplex or triplex or townhouses or lofts and walk-ups and apartments, you know, to try to just kind of study the pictures. I call them sugar cubes. Study these sugar cubes and imagine, you know, different building formats. And so we talk a lot about cottages in Michigan and a lot of other markets as well, but it can be a great strategy for kind of lowering the price point and making it easier for lower income households to enter the market, which brings diversity for you. And then row houses. Duplexes could be stacked, or they could be side by side. You're side by side, or they could be stacked, and they could look like a lot of different things. You could have a double duplex. Now the challenge, we get asked this a lot, is, well, why don't we build more of these row houses, townhouses, smaller apartment buildings and courtyard type projects? Why don't we build more of this? And in a lot of markets, we have found that the zoning regulations have actually made some of these building formats illegal. So that's part of the challenge as planners and as planning commissioners and planning staff, is to really go into the citywide, you know, zoning ordinance and challenge some of these building formats. I am a faculty member with the Incremental Development Alliance. They actually do seminars, workshops, and boot camps to work with communities to do things like stress testing. Stress testing is basically taking these building formats and testing it against your zoning ordinance to determine whether they're even allowable, whether they're even legal, and what would need to change in order to make them allowable. So there's other formats in here. I also have a sheet in here on accessory dwellings. And this is another great way to provide more choices that are attainably priced. In section B, I have some sheets that demonstrate the annual market potential by target market for new owners migrating into East Lansing. So again, these sheets are that roll up. I'm rolling up everything from my Excel model and summarizing it onto this chart so that you can see if the city of East Lansing were to build new housing units for owners, and you were to go after some of these other target markets other than students. Students are not on the page at all. You could actually attract 250 new owner households every year. And these are the target markets most inclined to buy those units. 22 would be digital dependents, 21 would be full pockets, empty nests, 17 would be family fantastic. So that's the way to read that data. And I also rolled up the data by, remember I said that I knew their incomes, so I can figure out what their tolerance is by home value. 250 might sound like a big number at first, but the reality is that most of those households are looking for price points that are down here. You can kind of see the scale. Let me read this for you. Of the 250 new buyers that could migrate into the city each year to buy a new house, 35 of them are hoping to find a house to buy for 150 to 175,000. Another 30 would pay up to 200,000. And at the high end of the range, where most of the developers think that they can build, we only have really 25 households a year that would tolerate paying more than 400,000 for a house. So if a developer comes in and says, all right, great, Sharon said if we can build 250 new houses every year, I'm going to do that. And here's my proposal. And you look at it and they're all $400,000 houses or more, then we have to say, wait, well, you know, we think you're overbuilding the market on price point. We really should only build 25 that are 400,000 or more. And we need more units that are more attainably priced if we're really going to attract and compete and intercept these target markets that we could go after. Does that make sense? Questions? Yes, Ed.
Sorry, I think this all makes a lot of sense if we're living in a different place. But the problem I think in East Lansing is students are paying per bed. So how do you make housing that's affordable and to attract these different clusters that just won't attract students because it's cheaper?
Mm-hmm. So it becomes a real challenge. How do we build new houses and ensure that they're, you know, there's no way to absolutely ensure that they're not going to be purchased by the parents of students. Although you have lots of regulations in place that I know try to manage, at least try to softly or directly manage some of that. So even if we built 250 units, I cannot guarantee for you that they wouldn't be taken by the parents of students. But what we can do is build them in such a way that they're less attractive to students or less likely to be snapped up by students or the parents of students. And the way to do that is to work directly with developers on design of those units and design of those houses. So there are things that developers and builders will do to actually shape the units and the building and the amenities and the amenity mix in such a way that they can actually target certain lifestyle clusters. For example, if I were to build an apartment building and I'm a developer, hypothetically, I have to decide, am I going after young professionals or singles or single parents or families, maturing families or empty nesters? Maybe it's aging adults. That will decide whether or not I put a playground right at the front entrance of my apartment building. It influences whether there's a rooftop patio or a dog or a enclosed dog run, whether there's workspace inside designed for students, whether there's a fitness center, an athletic club, all of those things, whether there's a welcome center inside with a library and a chapel, all of those design elements are very carefully designed in to appeal to a specific target market. So the challenge is finding developers willing to do that. And I'll get that question next, I can guarantee, because still there's an incentive for the developers to build more student housing because they can charge by the head or bed, and there's a premium on that. So right now what's happening is as I observe the market, I see I'm seeing the development of units like that outpacing the growth in student enrollment. And there is data in here on student enrollment. You can dig into the main report and find it. And it's not that high. So at some point, you could ask, well, how can they continue doing that? And the challenge is that 85% of all students move every year. So if 85, all of those 7,000 student households all move every year, they're kind of migrating towards the newest, freshest thing. It's like it's you know, the market completely turns over and resets every year. So at some point, even if you did continue allowing student housing, housing that's specifically targeted for students to be developed in the city of East Lansing, let's say we continue just adding 200 units every year for the next decade, you know, eventually you'd have 2,000 units that perhaps that's a surplus. The market's eventually going to catch up to that. And then the units that they leave behind have to get rehabbed, and perhaps those become the entry point for some of these households that are looking for something more attainably priced. I want to jump to the rental. These are actually the rental units. Looks very different than the owner units. So there's actually 1,485 non-student renters that could migrate into the city of East Lansing each year. Only 25 will tolerate rents of $1,600 a month. Really, the peak in here is between $800 and $1,100 a month, or maybe $1,300 a month. So if we continue building student housing and we don't build anything in this price point, eventually we're going to have a surplus of moderately priced rental units, because the building owners are going to realize they've lost the student market. The student market went to the newest, brightest, shiniest building, and they lost them. And now they're converting those units to create an entry point for other households. So there's a little bit of what I'm saying is there's fluidity in this data. It's not, none of this is completely, it's not as rigid as the charts might imply. So you could say, developers will say, well, Sharon, I get this a lot, believe it or not, I cannot build 4 lease units for $550 a month for non-students. And I'll say, well, you could actually, if you built accessory dwellings, or if you built micro lofts or studios, or possibly we build something that's in a higher price point, existing households trade into those higher price points, and maybe the market loosens up on existing housing stock that allows these households to move into existing housing stock. So it's kind of lots of things can happen in the market that pushes and pulls on the data. Working with developers, I'm working with some communities right now where we're actually pre-qualifying developers to work directly with the community on building housing product that they have identified as missing in their local community. So, you know, if you're familiar with the terms of like missing middle housing, you know, you can go out and actually pre-qualify developers and say, look, we will find a way to work with you through a partnership and a relationship where we want to build a relationship with developers who will build units that are not for students, because we want to diversify. We're not trying to push the students out. We just want more diversity. And if you can work with us on a product that's a building design, unit design, and location in such a way that we can maybe disincentivize the students from gobbling it all up and reserve it for other target markets, then we will work with you to make it worth your while. And we're not talking about hard incentives like Although some communities are offering hard incentives, like actually giving them land. But maybe it's softer incentives, like streamlining the review process because you've pre-qualified them. And perhaps they come to you with a prototype, a building prototype. And you say, well, that's an awesome duplex. That's exactly what we're looking for. And let's find a place where, you know, we're going to pre-approve that building format and that duplex. And now let's work together to find the right locations for that product. I know I'm answering long on that question, so I'm going to pause there, see if there are questions, additional questions. These are the renter target markets, 1,485. And again, the students are not on here. 053 was the colleges and cafes. They're not on the chart at all. The next largest group is the striving singles. And again, I said earlier that the striving singles are so popular among developers building lofts, non-student housing lofts, urban lofts, and downtown locations especially. The striving singles are such a large number because so many of them move every year. Again, they're similar to students where 85% move every year. And because of that, they really generate a big share of the market potential. But there's a lot of diversity in here. You know, all the way down to the tough times, all the way up to platinum prosperity, even that 9 platinum prosperity could actually be renters. Those 9 are going to be the ones that will pay $1,600 a month.
Commissioner Wolf, I thought I saw your hand.
Yes, please.
Yes. Since you brought up the missing middle housing types, that's one thing I'm particularly interested in regards to this study. But first, let me ask, are you aware that we are in the process of drafting a new zoning plan that covers our entire commercial corridor and also the nearby residential areas?
Yes, and actually Justin Sprague is working with me. I know Tom mentioned earlier, he's working on a housing strategic plan. So Justin is kind of dialed in closer than I am on what you're actually doing with your master plan and zoning ordinances and districts.
Okay, well, maybe that means the answer to my concern is going to come later, but I'll tell you what it is, and that is that our downtown is currently, there's not a good transition between our commercial area and our single family homes. We have the commercial area downtown, and then almost immediately adjacent to that is the single family home, the Bailey neighborhood and others. And the part of the plan, actually part of our master plan and part of the new zoning would convert some of the nearby residential areas near to the commercial core to higher density, because the goal would be to get a greater population density in the downtown, and hope that that would then provide more varied support for more varied retail, restaurants, services, and so forth, to other than the student-oriented businesses. So those areas would be rezoned to some of the types of housing that you've shown here. You could most characterize it as townhouses and small apartments, flats, perhaps you might call them. There would also be some cottage zoning. And so my question is, to put it very simply, if we do that, is it likely to be successful? Is it likely to find and attract people to come live in those places? Well, and also attract developers to develop it. So if somehow we can get some sort of answer or guidance on that, I'd hate to see us do this and find out it's a futile exercise in rezoning and nothing changes.
Yeah, again, there's no way that I can guarantee short of your own internal kind of regulations and zoning, there's no way that I can personally guarantee that that some of the new units wouldn't be just taken by students or by their parents. So
Yeah, that wasn't really my question. The question
Okay.
was, if this rezoning happens, will developers take advantage of it? And will there be those from other areas who will want to come in and live in them? If we just put aside the question of students buying them,
Yes.
parents buying them for their children, or.
So I am positive that there's a market for that. And the market's deep enough that I can say, you know, you could even do 200 up to 250 brand new owner units a year, and up to, you know, 1,500 rental units a year, each year. So within that kind of use that as your barometer. There's a risk tolerance level depending on how much you actually build. So if I'm saying the market potential is 1,485 and you build that many, I would say you're pretty risk tolerant, you know, because you're really going for the full number. But if you say, Sharon, we're only going to build 200, I would say, well, that's really low risk, because you're only building, you know, 1/7 of the full market potential. So it's not real risky. And I would have high confidence in that. And you know, so these numbers are intended to give you a sense of who to target. So I really think, you know, you're still gonna, you know, you still have a deep market for the striving singles, but all of these other groups are also good target markets for you. And that was really the purpose of this study, was to demonstrate for you, if you build it, who would purchase it or rent it. And this is intended to be education also for the developers. So my hope is that, you know, I use these market studies extensively to actually educate the developers themselves on the market potential. So half of this is for you, but half of this is to help you attract developers by saying, look, we have a market here. There's a potential for something other than students, and here they are. You know, we could have 1,500 renters migrating into the city every year other than students looking to rent. And here's who they are. You know, that hopefully would give them the confidence to, you know, test other prototypes and other formats and building types other than just student housing.
Yeah, just two more comments. That in the discussion tonight, I've noticed two things that are discouraging about the plan I'm talking about. One is that, as I understand it, your data is showing that those who would come into East Lansing to buy are not likely to buy attached units. And that's what we're primarily rezoning for down there, is townhouses and small apartments.
Well,
so I think you're saying that those would perhaps attract renters, but not owners.
Not necessarily. I will clarify that. So this, you know, I only have so much space on this page really to get those words in there. And I wrote in there traditional houses. I will say that this category can include some townhouses as long as they have private entrances. So a 1 unit detached is actually, the nomenclature is that this is 1 unit detached, and I'm deducing that that's mostly detached houses, but actually some of them could be, they could be semi-attached townhouses as long as the townhouses have private entrances and porches or stoops. So that's a real important distinction. So I think the building format is going to be really, really important and key there. I also know that in East, well, you have a lot of duplexes already, some good, some not so good. So that's why, again, I'll just say it's so important to get the building format right. It's not quite enough to just say that, you know, as long as you build a duplex or a townhouse and it's, you know, that, you know, we're looking for buyers. I think you'll find buyers, but I think to ensure that you're hitting the target markets other than students, it's just so important to get the format. We got to nail it. And that means working with developers and builders who understand things like missing middle and understand step buildings, and we'll work with you on making sure that that format is spot on.
Okay, and then the last comment that was discouraging is it was brought up the high cost or value of real estate in East Lansing, especially downtown, where we have existing houses that are rented very, very profitably to students. So trying to get those redeveloped into the kind of missing middle housing for other types of tenants or owners is very economically challenging. And I'm afraid it would push these into the higher priced areas, which could be very hard to attract renters or owners to.
Right.
Obviously, there's nothing you can do about that, but I think the data you've presented kind of confirms that.
Yeah, I'm not sure I entirely understood the question, but I hear what you're saying. What you're saying is what I alluded to earlier, is that there's so many pushes and pulls in the market, and like every action has a reaction. So one possibility, I'm just going to throw this out there as a wild card, is you could imagine that, you know, there are developers still wanting to build student housing lofts. Well, what if we actually, you know, you could either allow them to build more student housing lofts in the city of East Lansing, or just say no thanks and let them build it in one of the shoulder communities, Meridian Township or Lansing, and just increase the supply of student housing in these, you know, attached loft type buildings. Eventually, those units are going to eventually, you know, the supply will outstrip the demand on students eventually. And would that actually loosen things up for you in these other tougher neighborhoods where, you know, where we have the students the student pressure on the owner market and on the surrounding neighborhoods? Does that change that dynamic? It's a theory. I can't promise it will play out that way. It's a theory. It's one theory. And the other approach, and then you're approaching it from the other side, saying, well, we're going to build more product that's geared towards non-students. So, you know, really, I always say we have to have a multi-pronged approach. There will not be any single solution that just, if it were that easy, we'd have it figured out, we'd be doing it. So we kind of have to let some of these forces try to play out a little bit. I know I'm not fully answering your question. I apologize. I think it's a good question to continue talking about and maybe air out again and have further dialogue on, for sure. Because there's multiple things happening in these neighborhoods surrounding your downtown. Multiple pushes and pulls and forces.
I've got a couple other, thanks, Commissioner Wolf. Commissioner Sullivan, then Commissioner Cahill. I thought I saw Commissioner Boyle, was your hand just, it looks like it's down now. So I'll let's start with Commissioner Sullivan, then Commissioner Cahill, please.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to get a better understanding of this point. So if I understand you correctly, if additional student housing is built, then a potential impact of that could be a market correction and the opening up of other types of housing. So I understand that point, I think. However, are there any potential risks, like serious risk to overbuilding student housing? And what would that impact be?
Absolutely. There is absolutely a risk because you could only really control what you're doing in your own jurisdiction. And meanwhile, the developers have already gone to the shoulder communities and they're doing the same thing there. So yes, there absolutely is a risk of overbuilding. And that's why I say, you know, we step into those kinds of strategies carefully and incrementally and not try to hang our hat entirely on one strategy where we could find ourselves regretting it. So maybe a little bit of all of the above. It's really tough to find developers that will come to you with designs and prototypes that are going to appeal to non-students, that will appeal to diverse target markets and not still be snapped up by the students. It's like, how can we absolutely guarantee that if you build 1,500 rental units, the students won't all just, you know, as a pack of fish, they just go to the newest shiny building. It's really, really tough. So I can't say this, that increasing your supply of housing in general and diversifying your housing, your building formats is that you can't go wrong on that. That just diversification in general would be a good thing. And making sure that yeah, again, I would say working with the developer and designing. I tell you, the way they design these units are carefully designed either for students or not. The floor plan. They know exactly what they're doing when they design a floor plan for lofts or apartments and how to target students versus other lifestyle clusters, without a doubt. So you may build 3 cottage-sized houses, and you know, you may design them for target markets other than students, and you might find that 2 of them still get grabbed by students. And you build 3 more, and then maybe another one gets grabbed by a student. I mean, it's not going to be all or nothing. But as the students shift, hopefully what they leave behind creates an entry point for lower income households that can still find a way to move into the market as your supply goes up. Ideally, the prices should come down a little bit, even as everybody's shifting and everybody's competing to grab the newest thing. There will be market corrections, so you can't go wrong in increasing the supply. The worst mistake that you could make is to do nothing, is to build nothing, because that is a no growth scenario. And that's a status quo. And that's what gets communities. I've seen it time and time again. They'll say, well, we have so much supply and we have so many households, and there's a match. We have, hypothetically, we have 1,000 households and 1,000 housing units. Therefore, we have enough. And that's what gets them stuck. That's when they get stuck. And once you get stuck, it's easy to spiral, to actually lose ground and actually fall behind and spiral down. So I would much rather see you add supply, even at a risk that half of that supply gets grabbed by a target market that you thought, darn it, we really wanted young professionals in there, but 2 of them went to students anyway. Keep going, because you know eventually you'll have enough housing stock to appeal to a broader range of a broader and larger diversity of housing and households and target markets. Sorry, I'm winding. I'm losing my voice.
We're fine. Commissioner Cahill.
Yeah, Sharon, you've kind of touched on what my interest was. Certainly, you've probably picked up in East Lansing, there's a lot of people who think we're overbuilt for student housing downtown. My thought on it has kind of been that it's maybe overbuilt for new people coming in, but we already have a large percentage of the student rental population in our neighborhoods. And my thought was, as you build these other buildings down more downtown or on the edge of downtown, they will be drawing students out of the neighborhoods.
Exactly.
Okay.
In theory, it's a good theory.
Okay. And then those houses that are, it would seem to me, are the rental houses are overvalued because they have this rental license. That there will be pressure on landlords because now they don't have the income that they have become accustomed to.
Yes.
Without providing amenities or taking care of the houses and providing landscaping and that type of thing. They won't be making as much money, and the value of the house will go down, which opens up a new market for people to move in.
Yes.
In my mind, but many people have different views on that. And so I was curious what your view was, but it sounds like you think if you build downtown, they'll come, sort of like the baseball field or whatever. And maybe they empty out of the residential neighborhoods that they're currently in. So you'd have the same number of student rentals, they'd just be shifted to where they're living now. And then hopefully, in my mind, you'd have families starting to take over some of these houses in the neighborhoods.
Right. So especially on the lower income brackets, because these houses have gone through the knocks, right? They've taken their knocks. Some of these units really get beat up by the students. So now the building owner has to go in and put a little bit of money in it to get it to appeal to a different target market. And that takes an investment. That's not cheap to do either.
And meanwhile, if they're not rented, they're paying their property taxes, and it's costing them money to hold on to them, and they're motivated perhaps to sell the house at a lower price than it would have been if they were relying on that rental license and what they could do with it.
Right. So you said that nicely, and I've been trying to say that, and maybe I didn't say it as eloquently, but you said it another way, and you said exactly what I was trying to say. And so there's all these, I tend to be really careful, and I kind of dance around things a little bit because nothing's ever all or nothing. You can't put all your eggs in one basket. So when we talk about a theory like what you just described, we have to recognize that it's not going to just happen as a big shift, and it's not going to happen overnight. It's just going to happen gradually and organically, and that things are fluid, and that as you build more housing units, you might build, 5 new housing units. Again, you might lose some of them to students, but as those students shift, assuming MSU is not really increasing their enrollment significantly to keep up with all of that those students then leave something behind when they shift. And what gets left behind theoretically should be renovated and help meet the needs of these other target markets that are looking for attainably priced housing choices in the city. You can argue it another way to say, and that this is in addition to that, right now we have developers saying, but still, they just don't want to build in this price point for non-students. So you could argue it this way as well, as to say, well, rather than building 1, 2, 3, 400 units in this price point, let's build 500 or 600. So we're going to just slightly overbuild in this market. And what happens is I'm really focusing here on brand new renters migrating into the city. I haven't included all the renters that currently live in the city that are shuffling from one address to another. So you could have some existing renters that say, oh my gosh, look at those 600, 700 new units just opened up. I'm going to end my lease over here and move in. And when they vacate a lease, when they leave a lease on an existing unit, it makes it easier for lower income households to get their foot into the market, to get their foot in the door. It's an entry point. And I say entry point's important because they will eventually trade up as well. We all kind of go through these stages of our lives, and I went through them. You know, I started off in a living in just a bedroom, and you know, kind of gradually migrated up from there. I've lived in accessory dwellings. You know, you know, so you would gradually just kind of step up through life, hopefully, as your career progresses and you meet a partner and you have now 2 wage earners and in the household, and you know, things change. So creating a market entry point is one thing, and then helping your residents trade up into new housing product is also a good strategy, enabling everyone to just kind of continue to climb the ladder and climb upward.
And it would seem to me that that shift also affects the need for new building, because if they shift into these the student population shifts into these other buildings, then all of a sudden, if the value of some of these rental houses in the neighborhoods comes down to what you would really expect for the type of house that you're buying there, and it's become disattached from the rental license and the ability to fill it with students, then all of a sudden you've already got housing for certain of those markets that were in your chart there, without,
Yes, right.
without building a thing.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So those shifts take time. You know, it can take a decade or 2 decades for those shifts to kind of play out.
Okay, well, thank you.
So it's a combination of allowing and tolerating some new student housing, recognizing that it's a release valve. It can serve as a release valve for pressure points in certain submarkets, while also introducing new housing product that's carefully designed for other target markets. It's a 2-pronged approach.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Commissioner Sullivan, was your hand still up, or did you?
Yeah, it's a new question.
Okay,
I'll be quick.
No, that's fine. And then Commissioner Wolf, I saw your hand as well.
So I've always found it very interesting, the dichotomy and East Lansing specifically, and I guess mid-Michigan in general, of renting versus buying, where it's like it's very expensive to rent here and it's relatively affordable to buy. And I guess just my anecdotal experiences, I remember in college, you know, rushing in October to buy a lease for the next year of like $600-700 to have a small bedroom in a rundown house. And then the year after I graduated, I bought a house in Groesbeck just outside of city limits for less than $100,000, and my entire mortgage was less than what my rent was. So I just think if that's something we could capture, I think it would be a really good thing for the city.
Thank you.
Commissioner Wolf? Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I think I have a very short question. In part C, there's 4 consecutive pages of graphics, 56 through 60 or so, and each one of them has the statement, all figures intentionally exclude university and college students because there is no market potential for additional student housing units. So this is it's the market potential for new rental housing. because there is no market potential for additional student housing units. That very issue was one of the major ones that caused us to, the Planning Commission, to request a housing study. And I think it's a very strongly worded statement and a very important statement, but I didn't see it anywhere else in the report. And it seems that if that's a statement you stand behind, it should be somewhere else in the summary, or somewhere else other than in these tables.
Yep, thank you. I actually deliberately held off on documenting that statement right in the narrative report because I wanted to make sure I was getting feedback from the city council and the housing commission and you, the planning commissioners, before I started weaving that in right into the narrative. And you're right that I felt, and I still believe that if you match it up, again, it's a matter of saying, well, we have so many students and we have so many student housing units and we have enough. It's a simple match. That's different than saying, but we have them where they're creating pressure points in our neighborhoods and creating stress and tension in our neighborhood. So maybe we just build more elsewhere anyway and create a release valve. That could be a reasonable strategy anyway. But so I realize I absolutely made the statement, but I don't want to take the development of additional housing completely out of the discussion, because that could be a tool. You could use it as a tool to help create relief points. So yes, I have deliberately withheld documenting that in the narrative. And I just want to make sure that we have these kinds of discussions and dialogues before I do so. And I've actually forgot that I had put it on these exhibits. So I'll leave them there for now. Leave them there. There they are for everyone to read. But yes, I have hesitated to write it into the narrative quite yet.
Any final or further questions for Ms. Woods?
If I could just,
Are you wrapping? Were you planning on aiming for about 2 hours or?
yeah. Yeah, so if I could just kind of do a wrap up again and reiterate what Tom said earlier. This does not have to be our last meeting. I don't vanish and go away. You never see me again. This is really part of an ongoing dialogue, and Tom and I have talked several times. I mean, I'm here as to assist you as your consultant, your housing consultant, through the summer and the fall, whatever it takes. If we need to have more conversations and more dialogue, if you have requests for data or want more information or have questions that you felt didn't get answered, this is the beginning of the dialogue, the beginning of the discussion. Nothing's written in stone. I'm providing you with the data to inform your own process and to help inform you so that we can have conversations. But just like with this statement, all figures, saying there's no market potential for additional student housing units. If we look at a perfect match, I can argue that, but does that mean that adding new student housing isn't a good strategy? I think it's something that's still on the table for discussion. So again, think of this as the beginning and not the end. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Actually, I read much, but not all of the document before this evening's meeting, and sort of the recap that you've provided has been helpful. It'll help when I take another look at it. Some of the stuff that I had missed, that's now absolutely clear because you explained it. I'll be able to go back and pick up on some of the things that I know that were difficult for me to understand earlier. So thank you.
Well, thank you for persevering.
Absolutely. Mr. Menzer, did you have a question? You're muted. still muted.
I think it's the microphone.
No. No. You're definitely, oops,
How about now?
there you go.
Hey, sorry, I can't explain it. I wanted to echo everything Sharon said about this just being the beginning of the process, because it very much is. And I do want to share with everyone, there is a website that the city set up. It's cityofeastlansing.com/housing study. So if you could please share that, what we're trying to do here is get some feedback. So there's a dialogue box set up so that people can send feedback on the plan, and we plan to use that throughout the entirety of the housing study review.
Terrific. Thank you. Vice Chair Boyle?
Yes, considering the size of the document, the draft document, it would be really helpful if I could have a print copy. And I suspect there might be others on the commission who feel the same way. So
I can work on that. So
Very good.
yeah, why don't I shoot out an email tomorrow and get a count, and I can work on that. I'll talk to Tom about it.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Commissioner Wagner?
I'm not sure if this is a question for Sharon or Peter, but what is the process now? Will there be a public input rather than just going to the website? Will there be a official presentation? I mean, a 300-page document is a little intimidating. If you're Joe Public trying to figure out what's going on at the housing situation. Will there be something coming up this summer or fall where you present to anyone who's interested in the city, or how does that work?
Yeah, I very much envision something like that. We don't have anything set in stone yet about where this is going to go from here. Really phase one was getting this in front of the City Council, Housing Commission, and the Planning Commission to get some preliminary feedback and identify some of the primary questions that have come out of these discussions, and also identify any kind of missing links in terms of data. So what we're going to do is go back and work with Sharon and our planning team and talk a lot about these and kind of grab all the comments together and really get a picture of where we're at now. And I'm sure we'll have some more information for you on rollout here soon.
Any other questions for either Commissioner Wolf?
Is there maybe you said this already, is there a timeline or even approximate for the housing strategic plan, sort of the second part of this?
We are working with Ms. Wood's partner at CIB Planning,
Right.
and we're hoping to have a draft next week for staff to review. And then so over the next couple of weeks, we'll be going over that and working with the consultant to finalize something and then roll it out in the same manner that we've been doing here. But I don't have a specific day or even yet.
Okay, but it's coming soon.
Yes.
I asked largely because I think it sounds as though it's strong. It could be strongly related to my concerns about the impact of our form-based code and where we want to go with that, because that should reflect our housing strategy.
It very much will, and that's included in the scope that was provided to the consultant team.
Yeah, okay.
Any other questions, comments? All right, Ms. Woods, thanks for your time, and we'll definitely see you later.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Absolutely. We have no public hearings this evening, so that'll move us on to item 8.1, old business. This is a consideration of a request for a site plan and special use permit approval from MJW Investment LLC for the property at 128 Collingwood Drive to establish a Class A multiple family residence, which is to say a fraternity. I have two names on this, so I'm going to start with Ms. Schmidt, and if it's not, then take Mr. Menzer, I guess.
Thank you. I'll get started here. I just want to backtrack a little bit and remind you this property was a fraternity house until 2010 when it was converted from a fraternity house to a regular apartment building with 14 units with 3 and 4 bedrooms. The units some of the units were on 2 floors, including the basement level. At that time, the occupancy was set at 56 persons. The apartment operated as typical apartment until September of 2020 when the fraternity moved into the building. The owner leased the entire building to the fraternity. At the public hearing that we held on March 24, it was brought to staff's attention that this one of the apartment units was converted to a gathering space. And further discovery, we realized that there was never a building permit pulled for that renovation. So staff has been working with the applicant for quite some time, getting the proper permits in and getting the work looked at by our building staff. The actual rental license it's up soon, and they're applying for a new rental license at this time. The rental license, because of the elimination of the apartment, is a habitable unit within the requirement. A change in the initial rental license will need to be made. The occupancy has been reduced from 56 to 52 persons and in 13 units opposed to the 14 units. The applicant has applied for the renewal and that expires on May 28th. And part of that renewal will require a condition of approval that all of the fire and building requirements are met prior to renewing the rental license. The floor plan for the space has been reviewed, and based on the apartment size and the fact that it has one exit, the occupancy will be limited to 49 persons. Staff has provided a condition of approval stating that, also a condition of approval stating that the fire and building would have to be met prior to, as a condition of approval with a special use permit. So if those are not met satisfactorily, the rental license will not be renewed, and the building permit or the special use permit will not be implemented. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions from Ms. Schmidt? I'm not seeing any hands, thanks. Well, I guess if we're satisfied that either the conditions are met or have been met or will be met, then it's the commission's pleasure to move on this, perhaps with a motion. Commissioner Cahill.
I move that in the matter of the request from MJW Investment LLC for special use permit and site plan approval for the property at 128 Collingwood Drive to establish a fraternity in a 13-unit apartment building. Is 13 right? Didn't we just say
13-unit apartment building.
Okay. In a 13-unit apartment building with an occupancy for, should be 52 or 49?
It's 52.
Okay.
52 for the apartments, 49 for the spare room apartment.
Okay. 52 persons and the associated gathering space. I move to recommend approval to the city council, subject to the following conditions, which would be the 9 conditions in the staff report.
Thank you.
Second.
That's been moved by Commissioner Cahill and seconded by Commissioner Wolf to recommend approval to City Council. Is there any discussion on that motion? Commissioner Wolf?
Just a question. Is there no applicant or representative here for this?
Doesn't look like anybody is in attendance but us. We had good attendance last time. Of course, school was in session then too. Anyway, any other discussion on this motion? Sorry, it's my job to move it forward, isn't it? I'm seeing no hands. So that being the case, let's take a roll call vote, please, Mr. Menzer.
Commissioner Cahill.
Aye.
Commissioner Sullivan.
Yes.
Commissioner Williams.
Yes.
Commissioner Boyle,
Yes.
Commissioner Wolf,
Yes.
Commissioner Lapine,
Yes.
Commissioner Wagner,
Yes.
Commissioner Bowman,
Yes.
Commissioner Hendricks.
Yes.
That's unanimous and that motion carries. Thank you. We have no new business and that will move us on to item 10, Commissioner concerns. Does anybody have any concerns they'd like to share or raise? Commissioner Cahill.
I do have a concern on a couple of levels, and it has to do with the Graduate Hotel and the landmark. We had some discussion at our last meeting about the visibility of the mechanicals on the roofs of both of those buildings. And I have several concerns specifically as to those buildings. One is that I went back and looked at the renderings that we were provided for those buildings. They don't show any of that in the renderings. And I've become more and more sort of incensed about it as I've been driving from downtown Lansing down Michigan Avenue. And I see, as we're coming into downtown East Lansing, all these mechanicals up on top of the Graduate and the landmark. And it's a really awful looking site. And it gives a really bad impression of, I think, our downtown. So the immediate concern I have has to do with the fact that the renderings were misleading about what would be on top of those buildings. I mean, it looks like it was designed by Consumers Power, like they did the Hagedorn and Bircham installation they did. It has all the beauty of it. But secondly, looking forward, I'm very interested, especially as we go into the form-based code, to having provisions that require that that there be, what's the word I want? Some sort of masking or whatever on the top of these buildings, so that mechanicals on the roof of a building will not be visible to the public as they come down, and that the masking be done in such a way that it's consistent with the look of the rest of the building. But I am concerned that the renderings were so misleading about what you would be seeing there. I don't know if we can do anything about that at this point, but I would hope we could.
Commissioner Wolf.
Yeah, just a question for Jack. Do you really mean the landmark or do you mean the Abbott? You mean the...
I'm sorry, the Abbott.
Yeah.
Yeah, the two buildings on the corner of Abbott and Grand River.
Right.
What is the landmark, by the way? I got
That's the Center City, the Target.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry about that. There is some of that on that building also, but it's far less visible than what you see on those other two buildings. And I think that's something we have to keep in mind looking forward for any buildings and the type of regulation we have in place.
Any other concerns? Seeing no hands, and if not, if there are no further concerns, then a motion to adjourn would be in order.
Wolf, move to adjourn.
Thank you.
Cahill, support.
It's been moved by Commissioner Wolf and seconded by Commissioner Cahill to adjourn our meeting. Let's have a voice vote on this. All those in favor of adjourning, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? The motion carries. We are adjourned at 9:21. Thank you, everyone, for your time. See you in a couple of weeks. Be safe.
Good night.
Thanks.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Yeah.